So, welcome, Mr. Riley. Thank you so much for coming. James Riley is an award-winning, best-selling author of the Once Upon a Time series and among other amazing books. And he's also been an editor and will talk to us today about some of his experiences and his skills and what he's doing now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm James Riley. I've written somewhere around 14 books right now, not all of which have come out, but kind of planning on just chatting with you about my experiences in publishing, in writing, working with editors, being an editor myself, which was mostly at USA Today. I was a travel editor, and I did a little editing work with freelance writers at AOL actually a long time ago. So I can kind of give you, if that's what you want to hear more about, we can kind of cover some of that during a Q&A. So I can kind of give you whatever kind of career advice you might want to find out about, just like what it's about or what it's like to be an editor for freelance writers, my experience with editors in publishing, and sort of let me start with my experience in publishing. I just to give you a really broad view, I've been writing stories since I was like 8. I never showed anyone. It took me until like college to realize I might want to actually share them. And I had some really great professors in college who encouraged my writing. And so it was after college when I wrote my first book, which was terrible and no one will ever see it. But I learned a lot from writing that book. And that's the second book I wrote was the first book in my fairy tale series, which is called Have Fun a Time. And to give you a glimpse into what writing is like, just this minute, I was tweeting with somebody who did some fan art, which is amazing. It's so cool. It's the biggest honor to have like one of these kids who's reading the book draw one of your characters. They love it that much. It's the greatest compliment you could ever get, especially because I have no artistic ability. So watching them draw is just, it's huge. But she pointed out something. So I wrote 3 fairy tale books, and they're an homage to Disney, which I love, and to the original fairy tales and everything. And you know, Disney movies are seen by like 3-year-olds, and they all have kissing in them. And my books, at the end of the book, I had 2 of the characters kind of come together, and they were like a classic fairy tale pair that you find out as they go. And my editor didn't allow them to have like an ending kiss. And I pointed out to her that like, you know, kids much younger than the age group for these books have been seeing this stuff in movies constantly. But one set of parents in Texas had complained to a Barnes and Noble about kissing in a middle grade book. And middle grade is sort of a category they kind of invented after Harry Potter, as far as I understand it. You've got young adult or YA. That's when I was growing up. That was kind of like everything after chapter books. So like your Frog and Toad are friends kind of stuff. Before you get to adult books, it was just all kind of like young adult. But when Harry Potter came along, they needed a category for sort of younger kids, and they say it's like 8 to 12. I tend to think of it as like all ages appropriate, or at least down to like 7 or 8-year-olds. And that's kind of how I write. I write for myself, but just kind of make it appropriate for kids. And one of the requirements that Barnes and Noble have, if you want to be stocked in middle grade, is that the characters have to be age 12. They can't be any older or younger, as far as I understand it. So this is kind of a glimpse into what publishing is like. I couldn't have any kissing in my fairy tale books. They had to be age 12 for whatever reason. So I was just talking to this girl who had done the fan art, and she's like, "You left something out of the last page." And I was like, "I know," and I had to explain to her that I honestly I didn't have any choice. So that's an interesting glimpse into publishing. If you're interested in being an editor or being a writer, you're in good company. Like everyone in publishing wants to be there. Everyone loves books. They wouldn't be there if not, because they're not doing it for the money. Publishing, especially for New York publishers, doesn't exactly pay well until you sort of get into like the upper echelons of and become more of an executive anyway. And then you're sort of not doing as much of the hands-on work with books that you might want to be doing anyway. And that changes depending on, like, my last editor who ended up just leaving. She worked on a series called Dork Diaries, which is huge. They like rent out tour buses for her to go on tour. And I mean, those books sell millions of copies. So the publisher makes however many millions per book or per when each new book comes out. To the point, like, if those books don't come out on time, Simon and Schuster has a hole in their budget. So they're very dependent on my old editor to get those books out. And they still, she always wanted to do YA books though. So she would do these middle grade books that sold really well. And she figured that was kind of like, that kind of protected her at the publisher, because all these publishers have layoffs, and just like any other corporation. And it didn't, unfortunately. They basically told her she had to stop doing YA books, which her YA books were more like, they were more issue oriented. So she was doing a lot of stuff that really meant something to her as a kid, that she got something out of. So it was a lot to do with like just all kinds of mental health kind of stuff. So she felt really strongly about getting these books out, and they basically told her she'd have to stop doing that and focus entirely on middle grade. So she left. So like I said, these people, they all want to be there. They all want to make good books. They also, nobody really knows what they're doing. And that's probably the case in every corporation and in every job in the world. Something I never really thought about. I always kind of looked at adults and figured they knew what they were doing. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that's all just faking it. But it's really apparent in publishing, because there are no scientific studies about what sells. There's no, like, you can look back and say, like, this book was huge, but you can't replicate that. And they try every time. You get, when Harry Potter came out, you would get like Greg Fox and the whatever, and they would try to replicate the success, and it never works, because I mean, readers are discriminating, and they're not going to like just fall for some easy like ripoff kind of thing. Especially kids, because kids can sniff through that stuff in like a matter of seconds. On the other hand, they want to read. I mean, as a reader, I want to read more things like the things I love. So you've got this kind of push and pull in publishing, where everyone, they follow the trends, usually maybe even a couple of years ahead of the actual books coming out, because that's, you know, it takes a while for these books to come out. So everything's very like, it's almost instinctual what they're doing, and half the time that just ends up not working. Half the time, like, they have a habit of throwing money at things that don't really need it. Or the more successful something is, the more willing they're more willing to put their money into marketing and stuff, which is sort of a safe kind of, it makes sense from a lot of perspectives, but it doesn't help when you're a new author and you're hoping to make your big break, which I was when Half Upon a Time came out. And that book actually has gone through like 20 some odd printings now, and it's been amazing. And at the time, they didn't want to finish the series, because when it first came out, nobody was picking it up. It had a very strange cover, a very adult cover when it came out at hardcover. And they switched that up for the paperback, which looked more like a Pixar thing. This is the kind of, my cat just walked into my office, so there might be some disturbance. But this is the kind of thing that they're all kind of, it's like trial and error sometimes. They tried one cover, it didn't work. They changed the cover, it suddenly did. It got onto some state reading lists. That encouraged more sales. State reading lists are amazing. I don't know, California has a very like elite list because of the size of California. So any author would like be thrilled to get on it. My friend Shannon Messenger, who wrote Keepers of the Lost Cities, won that list, and like her sales just skyrocketed around the country too. So it's kind of amazing. But that actually saved that series. I was on the Missouri state reading list, and then Florida, and it just kind of, they suddenly see that there's like interest, and then stores will start picking it up more, and the publisher will start putting more effort or more money usually into marketing and stuff. So it's like it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where they're willing to put they're willing to put time and effort into the books that already are kind of getting them, or maybe don't necessarily need it as much. So it can be frustrating. I'm just rambling. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask. So yeah, it's a very interesting industry. You start out basically once you have written your book, and it almost always for fiction, you have to write your entire book before getting an agent. Literary agents will take your book, pitch it to multiple publishers, find out whoever likes it. They're the ones with all the context. They know what publishers are looking for. They know the tastes of individual editors, so they're invaluable. They also are like all up on contracts and legalese and stuff that most authors shouldn't be touching, whether or not they think they're okay at reading contracts or not. A lot of publishers, it's not even like that they're trying to sneak things by you, but they have all kinds of little ways that sort of benefit them that agents should know. Stuff like they'll buy maybe 3 books in a series, and say that, you know, you get an advance based on the book, and then your advance is, tell me if this is all kind of stuff that people know, but an advance is basically an advance on your royalties, and royalties are basically you get paid around 6 months to a year after whatever sales happen for your book. So if they give you $10,000 for an advance, you have to pay out those royalties before you make any more money. You have to earn over $10,000 to get another dollar. And some publishers will do something where they like account the books all together. So if you got $30,000 for your advance, you won't get paid on book 1 until you have earned out $30,000. And nobody likes that. And that's the kind of thing that an agent will catch and be like, no, we're not going to do that. They'll say stuff like publishers will try to get the graphic novel rights or things like that. It's all this kind of legal stuff that someone needs to be aware of, and that most creative people aren't really in that mindset, so maybe aren't really thinking about it. Or maybe they're thinking that the publisher has their best interest at heart, which, while your editor might, the publisher's a corporation, they're going to take, like, they're going to make any kind of profit they can, and that's theoretically their job. So yeah, it's agents basically are very difficult to get. They're almost like they're almost like a barrier to publishing that you don't need them. You can find editors who will take your book unsolicited. Oftentimes that'll happen like at a book festival or something. Some editors and some agents will have like special meetings where they'll set aside like 5 minutes and you can pitch your book to them. So that can happen, but it's rare, and you probably won't get as good a deal as if you had an agent anyway, because they are able to negotiate for your advance, your royalty percentages, all kinds of stuff. They take 15%, and it's still far worth it to have an agent, even based on that. And then you also have self-publishing, which is both like the profits are sort of potentially much bigger because you're not paying anyone else. All of that comes straight back to you, but you lose all of the access of a publisher. So getting into stores and having it actually printed out. So that's, I don't know as much about self-publishing, and I know that you can actually print out your own books, but I'm not as knowledgeable about that in general, but it is an option. So anyway, my agent right now gets like 800 to 1,000 manuscript, like people sending him new manuscripts a week. So that might tell you like how many people are trying to sell books that they've written. And that's a huge group. So it could be like someone who hasn't even started their book, but they're pitching an agent, to someone who's you know, got the entire thing and it's been professionally edited somehow. So there's a wide range within that. But it often will come down to you basically cold pitching an agent over email in a one, maybe even a paragraph describing your story. So it's very difficult to summarize a lot of these, like your life's work when you've put a year into writing this thing, and to try to like, like creating a good synopsis is such an important skill, and it was one I never learned. And it became something that I actually, when I was coming up with a book idea, I tried to come up with ideas that I could easily make into pitch lines. Be like, well, it's this and meets this, or it's a girl whose father is a fictional character, which means she can jump into books. That was my second series, Story Thieves. And it became like that because it was so painful to me to actually write these synopses that I was like, let me start it from there. But they are really important, and that's usually what I mean, agents will have a good relationship with a lot of editors, and they'll have worked with them before. They'll know what they're looking for, but like these editors are getting a lot of agents pitching them as well. So it becomes like the more easily you can kind of summarize your book, and the more kind of you get to like the quick point that stands out, it's going to help you. And that's hard to hear, especially for books that are like more character oriented or more kind of about an issue. I have no idea how nonfiction works either. So that's, I know what it's like to be an editor at USA Today and like have people pitch me ideas that, but like travel is so, it's so different because it's immediately understood. You're like, I'm going to do this thing about Disney World. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. We don't need like a lot of back and forth about character arcs. So it gets difficult. It's very hard to find an agent. I did it the worst possible way, which was basically, this was so long ago, I was sending out self-addressed stamped envelopes with my cover letters. So it took me 6 years, and I gave up constantly. And I ended up getting an agent only because an editor had asked her to see fairy tales like the day before. So me pitching a fairy tale book, she was like, sure, I'll read it. And so she only read like the first 20 pages, and then she was like, all right, give me the rest. And then she read the rest. This was like a multi-week process. Turned out she wasn't even a very good agent, but that's I'm not gonna like trash talk or anything, but like she was sort of ready to retire, and she kind of had stopped caring about a lot of things. So, but at that point, especially in my career, I had no choice. So you kind of, and I think that's a problem with a lot of new debut authors. You spend so long trying to get an agent and hopefully someone who's going to like your work that once you get one, you kind of, you're willing to take whoever will accept you. And that's actually something that isn't as bad as it might sound, because it's actually not that hard to switch agents if you get published, as I discovered, because my editor was like, you can't work with her anymore. I'm going to give you a list of agents to go talk to. So that was fun. Yeah, so that they're basically the first line. They read through everything. They're almost like the people who read through a new slush pile. If you've heard of that, like publishers used to have a huge slush pile of just unsolicited manuscripts, where they'd occasionally, you'd hear stories about them finding like some golden ticket in something. But that's basically the jobs of agents for the most part now. Once you get an offer from a publisher, and you get all the contract stuff worked out, I don't know how detailed you're interested in, but it can often take like 6 months to a year to even see like the advance. So you're not going to be getting money anytime soon. The contract itself, it often, like now when I'm dealing with my same publisher and my same editor and my agent, and they're talking about books in a series that they've already published, it still takes like 4 to 5 months for them to work through a contract, including like contracts that are just literally copy and pasted from the last one. So publishing is not a very quick process. And when you turn in your book, it will often be about a year from that point before it comes out. And that's when theoretically the marketing and the publicity would all take place. A lot of which, as a debut author, they would want you to do as much as you could. So obviously, like social media is very big. It's less big for my age group because kids 8 to 12 theoretically aren't supposed to be on any social media. Of course they are. But you're kind of more, for me, it's like I'm trying to appeal to teachers, librarians, parents, and then secretly it's like, here are cat pictures. So any kids who are on here, I use my cats. They're like my best marketing. So basically, when you get an editor and you're working through your concept or your book, depending on so for half upon a time, I was actually I was talking to an editor from Little Brown who was interested in it, and she was like, I really like the book. I want you to make it much more serious, because it was very humorous. Because she thought it would work better as a fantasy book. And then my editor, Simon Schuster, ended up taking it. Was like, we need to play up the humor, because this is definitely, that's what's big about this. And that's when I started to get a little aware that I mean, it's important to remember like that all these editors are basically going by their own taste and what they prefer, and that's that's why it's really important to find someone who like will appreciate whatever you bring to the table, hopefully. And it did work out because my editor, Simon & Schuster, actually did seem to kind of grasp what I was coming from, or where I was coming from, and like my style. So we worked together to kind of build that over that series, and then through Story Thieves and stuff too. But it's one of those things that it's like I said, and I could probably keep coming back to this, is no one really knows what works. Everyone's just kind of operating on what did work. There's like, we've been going back. I have a new series coming out, so we're doing covers right now, and I'm usually late on my books, so the cover artist usually has nothing to read, so it's usually me giving them ideas of what scenes are going to come up. But this book I actually finished in enough time for the cover artist to read, so she sent back several sketches, and she's an amazing artist. But the sketches, it's everyone's got these ideas in their head of what needs to happen in these sketches, in these covers for kids. It's like they need action, they need kids need to see movement and action. And the one we ended up going with is there's no action in it, and there's no movement at all, and it looks like a movie poster of someone posing, and everyone just liked it better. And so but I've been like beating my head against the fact that you need action in a cover for 10 books now. And it's just one of the little things that people kind of got in their heads. And I'm sure there are examples on both sides of it, like, oh, this cover never would have worked if there hadn't been action in it, or this cover would have like, this cover didn't work because it didn't, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But it really does come down to there's no science to any of this. And I think that's where the passion becomes so important for people, for book lovers to be in this industry. Like I said, they're not making money, so it's because they want to put out good stories, and they want kids and adults to find these books and to love them as much as they do, because these are all works of love. And I'm sure it frustrates everyone in publishing as much as it does authors when like we're disagreeing on something or just have a different vision of it. But it's so hard to figure out, like, to foresee what might click, what book might come out in the exact right time. After Story Thieves, which was like this whole metafictional thing I did, like including sticking one of my characters in a choose your own adventure book, and then actively encouraging the readers to torture him, him getting eaten by dinosaurs. I did this, this was around like 2016, and as a Democrat, I was a little upset. So my book started getting a little more depressing. And that was not good for timeliness. Like, that was right around when everyone's like, I want escapism. And I'm writing like this realistic school of magic, sort of run by the government, and you can't really trust the government because I'm reading Twitter too much. And it was like all this stuff, and it really was just bad timing. And it's nothing, like, I don't know that I could have written a different book, just because that was the mood I was in, and I would have loved to write a more optimistic book at the time, or a series. But it turns out that series just kind of tanked, and I would probably guess it's at least partly due to the fact that it was much more cynical and like depressing than even my previous series. So it's something you can't control. It's something that, like, nobody knows anything in publishing. Like I said, like, Story Thieves did really well, and that was after my publisher like didn't want to take it, and they kind of just did it because they were like, well, we'll see what happens with it, because they thought it was too metafictional. This girl who could jump into other books, and like they explore like what happens if characters get out and meet their creator and meet their author and what that means. And they're like, kids aren't gonna like that. And it turns out it was like my best-selling series. And so you do kind of just have to go with what you think. You go with whatever you want to read, and you go with whatever you can write. So that's a really disjointed, quick description of what publishing is like. It really, I would say, like, blue sky view of publishing would be like the 6 years of trying and having no luck, and then lucking into an agent out of nowhere. Whenever people ask me about that, I'm always like, just stick to it, because perseverance got me an agent, much more than anything else. Certainly much more than any kind of talent or luck I had. And I freely admit I've gotten much better as a writer, just practicing and doing more books. So the book wasn't even particularly that great. It was all just happenstance. But if I can do it, then anyone can do it. So if you do have like if you do want to be a writer, just stick with it and go to book festivals, because it's so much easier to meet an agent in person and pitch your book to them rather than send them emails that might badly summarize your book anyway. So in terms of editing, if you're sort of looking more along those lines, publishing is like, it requires you to do so many more things than just edit a book or like deal with ideas. I mean, they're the ones who are actually making offers to agents. They have to deal with the accounting department and go through like profit and loss statements. They go through, but these are estimates on what they think the book will do, and no one has any idea. So it's just kind of like a shot in the dark. And that kind of thing, the accounting department will determine like what kind of royalty or what kind of advance you can even offer. So the editor is dealing with that. They're probably your, as an author, they're your first contact, and they are dealing with publicity and with marketing, with the higher ups, with the sales departments. They're trying to get your book in Walmart and Target. They're trying to get your book to be prominently displayed in Barnes and Noble. They're doing all of this for every single book they're covering, while also trying to take in new books and getting like inundated from various agents and everything at the same time. So yeah, you really, it's practically a project management kind of job. I know I'm really making this sound attractive, but like it's publishing, it's getting books out there, and you're the one as the editor who gets these books out there. Like, you have someone who you have to answer to, usually a publisher of an imprint. And so every book that comes out has to be approved by them, but the editor is the one pushing it to the publisher. They're the ones they're the ones pitching it. They're like, well, here's what I love. Here's what this author has done before. Here's what I think this book could do. Here's how I think we would position it in terms of sales and everything. They have to basically present these books in I forget what it's called, an acquisitions meeting. Where basically it gets decided at that moment, like if that book's going to get taken or not. And that might be an easy choice. That might be like kind of a seat of your pants kind of thing. But that's all on the editor. So if that book is going to get published in any way and read by anyone, it's because the editor loved it and wanted to push it. So they are the final word or basically the final word, especially to authors, on what gets put out. So if that's the kind of thing that appeals to you, it does come with a lot of bureaucratic nightmares, but like you are also in charge of what books that you love get out there to people who might really like connect with them. So there's something incredibly like noble about every editor I've ever dealt with. And they're all just so great because they are there because they love books and they want to love your book. They want to be like surprised by something new, and they're never going in and being like, oh, another one of these. They're like, no, this might be great. And they're reading books over the weekend that they don't have time to read during the week. Not even their books, which they're also doing, but just like submissions. So you do read a ton, which is great. And you do have to get really fast at reading. I forget, my editor told me how many books she read, especially on her own time, and it was just insane. But it gave her the ability to really quickly read through my drafts, which I appreciated. Yeah, and it's not only that, it's dealing with a bunch of authors who are not the most stable, who might be like freaking out because they got a bad tweet. They might be low in the Amazon sales rankings, so they're like, this book is over, the series is over, no one cares. I'm not saying that from experience, but I am a little bit. But I've gotten horror stories from my editor who it does seem like you're almost acting as a psychologist to a bunch of very creative people who are maybe not dealing with things in the most healthy way. And they're like the first contact. So they're going to get a lot of grief from authors, especially about things they don't really have control over. Also about some things they do. So it really is a job for people who love it. Same with writing. And there are just as many challenges on both sides, but very different challenges. In terms of, I do want to get to a Q&A because I'd much rather talk about what you would like to hear about. But just real quick about like, if you have any desire to go into journalism or nonfiction writing, I got more of an experience from like dealing with corporations at USA Today than I did with writers. The writers were a joy. I tried to get them paid as much as possible. My managing editor would be like, I just got them, like, we need to just get some people on for free and like have them write for exposure. And that's disgusting. Never do that. Never do it, and never like work for someone who's asking you to do it, or be willing to work for them. If you had any idea how many like writers worked for USA Today as freelance writers and could put that on their resume and how little anyone cared after that, it's depressing, but it's also like, it's never going to get you anywhere. You should always demand money for your work. This is worth something. Like any creative effort you make, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it's worth something. The corporation is 100% going to make money off of it. So you deserve your portion of that. So I did kind of want to make sure to get that out there. Never work for exposure. It'll never be worth it to you, and it will always 100% be a profit on their side. But yeah, it was a situation where I did feel like I tried to get as many writers in as possible, and that was a nice feeling because none of the rest of it was. I've had a lot of corporate jobs, and they're all basically a reminder of why I don't want to work in a corporate job, and why I much prefer writing and getting to create my own worlds, where I have the tiniest bit of power. Which is not to say that like if your journalism requires as much a sense of love and wanting to like make things better as writing does, and wanting to connect with people. So if you do it, I'm 1000% inspired by you.